Welcome to the Alyosha Society, where we're pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. Friends, my purpose with this video is onefold. Yeah, just one thing, onefold. I want to offer an interpretation. I'm just going to take a shot at it. All right, just bear with me. Of a novel I just read. I was not planning on doing a video on this one, but I just read a novel that exploded my mind a little bit. Yeah. And I mean, picking up the pieces, it was kind of messy. Thankfully, there wasn't a whole lot of brain to deal with, but this one did kind of blow my mind. Franz Kafka, The Castle. Now, I've read Kafka. I've taught Kafka. Very familiar with Kafka, but I hadn't read The Castle. And this one blew me away a little bit, and I want to offer an interpretation here. Now, I want to say this before I even get started. I know you don't need to tell me that. I know you're not supposed to interpret these. They're elusive, they're enigmatic, they're meant to just kind of stand, just let the story stand. It doesn't have. I understand that. I appreciate that, and I'm going to basically break that rule. Yeah, I'm going to just take a shot at what I think might have been going on in that unknowable mind of Franz Kafka. So I got some visuals that I want to walk through here. So let me pull those up. Now, look, I have another video where I talk about the biography and some background material, and it's sort of an intro and things to look for when you're reading Kafka. So go over to the YouTube channel and check that one out for a much more detailed discussion of those things. I'm not going to do all that here. What I am going to do is I'm going to walk through some of the same visuals that I used there, but I'm just not really going to comment as much on them here. So really quickly, before we get to the interpretation, timeline of Kafka's life. See what I look like with a Kafka hairdo. I think it looks better on him. Let me just kind of go down here. Actually, we'll stick over here next to the right ear. Born in 1883, German-speaking Jewish family. He gets a law degree. He's most famous, as you all know, for his story, The Metamorphosis. Gregor wakes up one morning to find out that he's having a bad day because he has turned into a giant bug. That story has been discussed for the last 100 years and will continue to be an important work of literature in modern times. Apart from that, he wrote 3 novels. He wrote The Trial. I don't happen to have a copy of The Trial here handy. But he wrote another novel called America, which honestly has some similar themes in it. And then, of course, he wrote The Castle, the one I'm talking about here. And then a lot of short stories. And that's kind of what he's more known for. So he was working on The Castle. You can see here in the timeline. When he died, in fact, it's really crazy. The novel literally ends mid-sentence, and his best friend Max Brod did not correct it, did not add to it, did not fix it. That's how Kafka left it. Kafka sort of gave up on the novel near the end of writing it and the end of his life. He just thought it wasn't good, and he asked his friend Max Brod to destroy all of his unpublished works after he died. Of course, Max did not do that. That's why we're talking in this video right now. So that's a little bit of the context. So later in his life, even though he's still a relatively young guy, 41 years old, did not actually finish it, but it's still over, say, 300 pages. There's enough there, I think, to talk about it. There's enough there to talk about it. So let's, again, in the other video that I have up, I discuss all of this in much more detail. Like, how do you get your brain around these absurd and surreal stories. And I think that his knowing a little bit about his life, particularly the abusive relationship that he had with his father. And I recommend this if you're really going to get into Kafka. Kafka's dad apparently had a strong objection to an engagement that his son with a young lady he wanted to marry. And Kafka decided, you know what? You've been a bad father all my life. You've been abusive to me all my life. And he wrote this thing is like 80 plus pages. This letter that Kafka wrote to his dad. And the whole thing, Kafka is basically saying, you were mean, you abused me, you hurt me. Here are all the ways that I believe you're a bad person, you're a hypocrite. I mean, he just goes on and on and on. And I believe very strongly that hurt, that pain is coming out in the alienation, the oppression, and even absurdity that comes out in Kafka's story. I think that they largely, he grew up Jewish. So there's this is early 20th century. He grew up in a part of the world where there was plenty of anti-Semitism. Maybe that also had something to do with some of the pain in his life. And Kafka was searching that he was Jewish, but his dad did not model a strong faith in anything. So Kafka was always looking for meaning, for some purpose in all of it. And he saw the world as a dangerous, mean place of chaos and absurdity. And that comes out in the stories. Some other things, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I cover these things in the other video. I said I wasn't going to get into these, and I did anyway. If you're reading through his stories, don't be shocked when you see that they are surreal. They're very dreamlike. You know how totally weird things happen in your dream, but in the dream, you don't think it's weird? That's what you're going to encounter in Kafka's stories. And if you know that ahead of time, you'll just kind of shake your head and go, oh, okay, that's not supposed to make sense. You can't travel that distance. You can't travel 10 miles. This is from one of his stories called A Country Doctor. You can't travel 10 miles in 2 seconds. Oh, it's kind of like a dream. You're just there. Yeah. A lot of ambiguity, a lot of introspection and symbolism and allegory. I think that the castle, there's a lot of this kind of symbolism, and maybe the castle is just a giant parable for the way Kafka viewed faith. Now here we go. This is the main reason I'm making the video. So let's get into it. My interpretation of the castle. Before we get to that, let me do a brief summary. No plot spoilers here, guys. There's not really plot spoilers in Kafka novels. Not all that much really happens in terms of a sequence of events or plot. Okay, this guy named K, yeah, that's it, just the letter K. Obviously, Kafka's referring to himself here, and he's making himself the everyman character. So this guy named K just shows up in a small village somewhere, we don't know where, because he had apparently been summoned there to do land survey. Now, he arrives in this village, and he was told that he was supposed to do this surveying for the castle. The castle's up on the hill, the village is kind of down in the valley. And he tries to make contact with the castle, who, by the way, we learn a few pages in, actually owns all of the village. But he can't get to the castle, and he can't contact anyone at the castle. He can't even get a meeting, even with a lower level official. It's just frustration. The villagers are kind of suspicious of him. They're odd people at best. At one point, Kay decides, well, I've got to have some income. I came here, I'm obviously not going to do any land surveying. He takes a job as a school janitor, and the only place for him to live is in one of the classrooms at the school with his love interest at that time, a woman named Frida, who used to be the mistress of one of the castle officials, a guy named Clam. K-L-A-M-M. His name has some meaning that I think ties into the story, like something that's locked up, something that's cold. You know, it's almost like we get the word clammy from the same word in German. If there are any officials at the castle, and who knows, maybe the whole building's just empty. If there are any officials there, they're very elusive. It's just very foggy about what's going on up there and who these people are. It's kind of Orwellian, to use an anachronistic term. You know, I mean, he's writing, Kafka's writing a couple of decades before Orwell writes, 1984 and Animal Farm. So, but it has the same feel to it as Orwell's novels. I'm going to be talking later about the Sortini affair. This is the part of the novel that I think blew my mind the most. So I'm going to wait and do that. But just a few words to help describe the tone of the novel. There's an inaccessibility. There's this frustration of, I need to get there, but I can't get there. Which reminds me of, we all have repetitive dreams. I have two or three. I'm going to share one with you very briefly here, because it ties in, and maybe that's why this novel resonates with me so much. But I have this dream that I've landed the teaching gig, whatever that is, just like the ultimate teaching position. I finally landed it. I don't know what that is. The Harvard of teaching position. And I show up to work and I can't find the classroom. And when people tell me how to get to it, I go down the hall and I go up these steps. But in the dream, the building is like a shifting maze. And what used to lead to one place now doesn't lead there when I go back. And the building keeps the hallways keep kind of shifting and moving, and it's like a puzzle, and I'm getting more and more nervous and upset because I've got to make it to the class because it's my first day of work. And that is the tone that Kafka sets in this novel. And I think that's one of the reasons, again, that it kind of blew me away. It's that inaccessible, that one final, that one final thing that you think, well, then my life will be totally fulfilled, but you never get it. It's the myth of Sisyphus. Roll the rock up the hill and it just comes right back down. Frustration, droning, passages that seem silly and ridiculous that go on page after page after page. I think he's trying to create that tension in the reader. There's an eeriness in this novel. There's a hopelessness. There's what you might call a slow burn, a very slow escalation that you kind of think is going to build and blow up, but maybe it never does. There's a dark mystery, and there's this feeling of the ominous in the novel. Kafka does a brilliant job, or at least the English translation I have. It's a wonderful job of setting that tone. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it just ends mid-sentence. Just boop, there you are, right off the ledge. Now, my interpretation. Now, some folks look at the castle and they say, well, it represents governmental bureaucracies, or it represents politics and this oppressive inaccessibility, and the common man can never get to where he needs to be. Okay, I'm not saying those are bad interpretations if they fit with Kafka's historical context and biography. I think there's some merit to them. But when I read, especially when I read the letter and I read the biography by Max Brod and put the pieces together, I'm going to call my interpretation the God who is not there. Little play on the Francis Schaeffer novel, the God who is there. The God who is not there, or at the very least, he's too far off to find. So I believe the castle is a picture of the way Kafka viewed God and religion. There might be something up there, but you can't get to it. You can't, it's not accessible. So it's a picture of Kafka's perspective on faith and God. So that means the officials of the castle would point to anyone who is like an intermediary between God and people, pastors, preachers, rabbis, priests of different kinds. And the officials in the story, again, are very secretive. They're not loving. We have pastors here in our churches that are warm and inviting. They're almost the opposite of what a pastor really should be. That's the way Kafka viewed them. K, as I said earlier, is you, but he's Kafka. He's every person who is, quote, surveying the land. That is, we are searching. We are looking to measure out the landscape. How did we get here? Who are we? Where are we going from here? What is it all about? So surveying and seeking for truth, but in the end, there are no answers. The search for salvation from any deity is absolutely vain. And the more you search and the more you seek for God and for truth, the farther away you get, not the closer. It's a strikingly painful reality to know that, there are folks wrestling with this on a deep philosophical level. And that was very striking to me. The other issue is the Sortini affair. So very quickly, at one point in the novel, a young lady, Kafka, it is Kafka, but Kay gets to know this family. And one thing happens here with one of the young ladies in the family. She's not married, young lady. And she receives a letter from this castle official named Sortini. And he is basically propositioning her. The language is not there. We're only told in the story that it's inappropriate, and you get the very strong feeling that it is of an inappropriate sexual nature. Okay, so this castle official propositions her, the guy sends the letter through a messenger, and the girl turns him away. Of course, I would hope my daughter would do that. The answer is no. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to meet you. No, not interested. Well, instead of the castle official being the one who would be expected to apologize or make amends, whatever the case may be, in the story, it's flipped around. The family has offended the castle, and the family must seek forgiveness for treating this castle official and the castle's messenger, which would be God, and then the messenger would be, let's say, a pastor or a priest of some kind. So the family then tries to set up meetings with any castle official to beg forgiveness. The father leaves the home and spends days, weeks camping outside the building, waiting for a glimpse of any castle official so that he could track him down, get a meeting with him, beg his forgiveness. I put the page numbers on there so you can see it's nearly 40 pages of these. I mean, it reaches a level of total absurdity, and at one point it's comical, but it's hard to laugh when you really understand what Kafka's communicating here. In Kafka's mind, he felt so guilty and downtrodden. And I think his father kind of made him feel this way. He never affirmed him. He never loved him in any way. He never gave him words of encouragement and so forth. And so Kafka just grew up feeling bad and guilty and with just smothered with shame. And he couldn't get rid of that feeling. So it's this seeking, what have I done, to God? And even though the girl was the innocent one in the Sortini affair, she's the one that the tables are kind of turned here. So I think Kafka perhaps may have thought, what have I really done to God? But yet I'm the one that feels this overwhelming sense of shame and guilt, and I can't find him to relieve me of it. That's Kafka's view. And then there in the letter to the father, Kafka talks about the fact that they grew up Jewish, but his dad, he says this right to his dad, gave the letter to his mother, by the way, and his mother never delivered it. You only went to the temple a few times a year, and yet you berated me for not going. You never said your prayers with any conviction, with any passion. It was obvious that you didn't even believe any of it. And yet you kind of felt like you needed to, check the box and make me go. And so I think when I read the letter, it's and then I read the castle, this interpretation fits for me. Kay was summoned. So another part of the story, of course, we don't know how, who, what, when, where, but to come and do this land surveying, but before the novel begins, he's summoned and then he's abandoned. That's essentially what happens in the story. So let's see, in this interpretation, God has somehow called out to humanity. Maybe he's done it in creation, whatever the case may be, but he has abandoned us. That's, I think, what Kafka's communicating here. I mentioned earlier that the village is owned by the castle, whatever or whoever that is. So in this interpretation, God, this is my father's world. I grew up singing that hymn. God has laid claim to this world, but he remains aloof. And therefore, life down here in the village seems meaningless. So in this interpretation, any written communications that come, and there aren't really that many, but written communications coming from the castle would point to, in this case, I think the Bible. In Kafka's case, maybe the Old Testament. If you're going to expand the interpretation, then I guess it could point to the Quran, any other holy books. Interestingly, the German word for castle is very close phonetically to the German word for lock and also the word conclusion. So the castle is locked away. It's the end of it all, and there is no hope for you. There's no key to unlock that door. Well, there you have it, friends. That is that's my interpretation. Please, please, please. I'd love in the comment section here. Tell me what you think. Hey, Bruce, that is not what Kafka's talking about. Well, okay, fine. Let's have a dialogue. Tell me in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. I kind of need you to do that if I'm going to keep making these videos. I want to end. I know this got way longer than I wanted it to be. Why should you even read this story? Coming from a Christian perspective, obviously it doesn't communicate a Christian message. We believe in the God who is there, who is present, who actually became one of us. It's almost the very opposite. You know, the head of the castle came down to become a villager in order that he might redeem those villages. So this story would look entirely different if you sort of baptized it, you know, and made it a Christian story. So why should you read it? I think, first of all, anytime you can read anything written by a brilliant individual, read it. Again, some of it may rub off. There's value in that. There's value in that. Beyond that, what does it mean to truly long for something? What does it mean to suffer? Not a day, not a week, not a month, but for years. What does that look like? What does that sound like? There are a lot of people in our world who are experiencing such suffering, and I think reading stories like this helps us to develop a sense of empathy for them, to kind of leave our bubble of whatever your bubble is. Maybe you feel happy all the time. Maybe you think you've got it all figured out. There are a lot of people who are really suffering, and empathy is a good thing. I think also getting a bit of a handle on how the world, folks in the culture viewed life right after World War I. World War I was a war of such destruction and devastation that the generation after that, the generation of the 20s, we often call them the lost generation. It was a time of disillusionment, despair. Even the Roaring 20s was probably more like, you know, eat, drink, and be merry, because we're all going to die and there's no meaning to any of this anyway. So I think getting to know that is helpful to get our brains, and I think it helps explain a little bit of how we ended up sort of developing and growing into what our culture is today, searching for meaning in this chaotic, absurd world. And then, you know, the last thing, I used to teach a course on modern literature. This is a really good introduction, you know, before you get into Faulkner and T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, some of those great authors of modern literature. Kafka is a good place to set the tone and get the plane off the ground with that. Friends, there it is. I'm putting it out there. I know this is kind of risky, but I'd love to hear agree or disagree with my interpretation of Franz Kafka's novel, The Castle.